Hi, my name's Silas, and the thing about being the quiet son, you learn to swallow a lot of things. But nothing tasted worse than the day my father gave my trust fund to my brother and called it an investment. He looked me in the eye and said, "You never do anything useful anyway." And I smiled, just barely, because that was the moment I knew they'd underestimated the wrong son. They took my money to build his dream, so I sold the roof over their heads. Tell me, when your own family treats you like an afterthought, what do you do next? The bell above the diner's door gave its usual tired chime as I stepped in. That sound always reminded me of being 15, dragging my muddy boots in behind Caden as he got praised for remembering to hold the door for Mom. Same bell, same place. Only difference was, now I was 38 and still walking into a room that never felt mine. The place hadn't changed in decades. Checkered floor, wood-paneled walls that probably hadn't seen polish since the 80s, fried perch and stale coffee in the air. Sunday night at Gus's Diner on the east side of Detroit. A Dorn family tradition that somehow still happened, even though we stopped feeling like a family a long time ago. Dad was already there, of course. Harland Dorn, retired tool and die supervisor, once union loudmouth, now a quieter kind of critical. He sat in the booth by the window, nursing a half-drunk cup of coffee like he was married to it. Caden sat across from him, crisp polo shirt, perfect posture, already mid-sentence about something scalable. "Silas," Dad said, barely glancing up as I slid into the booth beside him. "You're late." It was 6:05. Dinner was at 6. "Traffic on Gratiot," I mumbled. No one asked more. Dad turned back to Caden like I'd never arrived. His voice had a warmth I hadn't heard directed at me since... I don't even know. "So, tell me again about that storefront. Midtown, right?" "Yeah," Caden said, his voice a little louder now that he had an audience. "Right by that new mixed-use complex near Cass. Real foot traffic, you know. It's not just a store, Dad. It's an experience." I picked up the laminated menu I didn't need and stared at it anyway. Dad chuckled. "Now that's what I like to hear. Vision. You've always had that. You're the future of this family." He said it like a sermon, like it had been rehearsed. I nodded along, made a quiet clap with my fingers against the table. No one noticed. I wasn't surprised. Then it came, casually, like a tossed match onto dry leaves. "Let the adults talk, Silas." Dad didn't even look at me when he said it. It came mid-laugh, like a reflex, but my chest tightened all the same. I looked at him, then at Caden. Neither blinked. I was 38. Pay my bills. Never missed rent. No criminal record. Good teeth. But somehow, still, a child in their eyes. I didn't respond, just smiled and took a sip of my water. Learned that a long time ago. Show them it doesn't hurt, even when it cracks something inside. Caden launched back into his pitch. Online presence, influencer tie-ins, limited drops, the works. Dad leaned in, eating it up like it was gospel. "See, Silas, that's initiative. That's what you could learn from." I could have said I had a full-time job in data analytics, that I helped design fuel efficiency models used in 3 different states. But what was the point? It wouldn't be vision. I cleared my throat. "You might want to think about supply chain. Detroit's getting slower deliveries these days, especially imports." Caden didn't even turn his head. "It's already handled." Dad's nod was slow. "That's leadership." I looked down at my hands, nails short, calloused thumb from fixing the garbage disposal last week. The kind of hands that get overlooked. Then Dad pulled something from his jacket. An envelope. He didn't open it. Just tapped it gently against the table, keeping pace with the conversation. "Some investments just make more sense," he muttered. "You back the right horse." My eyes lingered on the envelope. Something twisted in my gut, but I pushed it down. "It's probably nothing. Don't make everything about you." Caden kept talking, voice slick with confidence. Dad nodded along like he was at a TED Talk. I tried to insert a question, something about zoning permits, but it was like shouting into a concert. I gave up. That's when my fingers brushed against the key in my jacket pocket. I'd forgotten it was there. A brass key, smoothed with age, hooked to a leather fob my mom stitched before she passed. The Penthouse. The one she left me in her will. We never called it that, but that's what it was. Top floor of a crumbling building on gray shit. But to her, it meant, "You'll always have somewhere." Her voice echoed, soft, worn. "As long as you hold the key, you'll never be homeless in this family." I clenched it tighter, just for a second. A flicker of warmth. Of her. Then Dad reached across the table, patting Caden on the back. "You should learn from your brother, Silas." There it was. The final shove. The one that always comes dressed as advice. I looked at Dad. Not anger. Not even disappointment. Just that same old hollow ache I'd trained myself to carry. I wasn't jealous of Caden. I wasn't even angry. I was tired. Tired of pretending like any of this surprised me. My father's fingers drummed against the envelope once, twice, then he slid it across the table. Not toward me, toward Caden. But his eyes didn't leave mine. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. It was that unreadable expression he'd mastered long ago, somewhere between a challenge and a dare. Caden reached for it like he'd been expecting the gesture all along. No surprise, no hesitation, just a smooth, entitled flick of his thumb over the flap as he tore it open. I didn't say a word, just watched as the grin crept across his face. Slow, smug, like this moment had been rehearsed in his head. Then he tilted the paper toward himself, gave it a quick scan, and chuckled softly. "Nice," he said, tapping the document once before folding it neatly. Dad leaned back, satisfied. "It's for the business," he said, still watching me. "He actually does something with money." It was quiet after that. The kind of quiet you only hear in a room when someone's lungs forget how to work. My hands stayed on my lap. I kept my spine straight, jaw clenched just tight enough to stop the shake. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe deep. Just sat. I knew that envelope. Even folded, even upside down, I knew it. It was the trust account my mother's family had set up for me before she passed. $34,000. Not life-changing, but enough to start something. Enough to breathe. And now it was gone. Transferred. Reassigned. Given away like a shirt that didn't fit anymore. "Isn't that a little sudden?" I managed, my voice scraping through the tension. Dad didn't even flinch. "Sudden," he repeated. "Son, you've had years. Years. You never used it. Caden has a plan. Timing matters." I wanted to say that wasn't the point. That it was mine. That I never spent it because I was waiting for something that mattered. Something real. But the words stayed jammed behind my teeth. This wasn't happening. He wouldn't do this. Not this. I glanced down at my hands again. Same fingers that used to thread my mother's sewing needles when her eyes got tired. Same hands that fixed Dad's furnace last winter. The same ones that held onto that key every day, just to remember I wasn't entirely forgotten. Now I wasn't sure anymore. I remembered Mom's voice, the way she used to say, "The people who deserve your love will never make you prove it." I looked back up, just in time to see Dad raise his voice. Not by much, just enough for the booth behind us to hear. "You should be grateful, Silas. You don't spend money on anything useful anyway." It hit harder than if he'd screamed it. The waitress came by with the check a second later. Her smile wavered the moment she felt the tension in the air. She placed the bill down slowly, looking between the three of us. Dad didn't glance at it. Caden leaned back, stretching his arms. The check stayed on the table like an unwanted guest, until Dad reached for it. I thought maybe, for a second, he'd do the decent thing. Instead, he slid it toward me. Not a word, just a small, deliberate push in my direction. I blinked. Caden had ordered drinks, appetizers, the steak special. I'd had a sandwich and black coffee. The waitress lingered, unsure whether to step away. I gave her a nod, barely lifting my eyes. She left, but not before offering me the kind of look I hated, pity dressed up as politeness. "Thanks, little brother," Caden said with a grin that made my skin crawl. "You always come through." There it was again. That twist of the knife. The way he said it. Like I was the reliable old pickup truck he'd call when his car battery died. I felt the nausea creep in. The anger, too. But I smiled, tight and sharp. "You're welcome," I said, voice low. He winked. "That's the spirit." I reached into my jacket pocket, felt the worn edges of my wallet, and pulled out my card. My hand trembled slightly as I placed it down. I could have argued, could have made a scene, but I knew what that would turn into. More humiliation, more twisted words. Caden would spin it into something ugly. Dad would say I was being ungrateful, dramatic. Instead, I sat still while the waitress returned with the machine. Her eyes met mine, soft, apologetic. I smiled at her, or tried to. Paid the check. Signed. Tucked the receipt in my pocket like it meant anything. Somewhere in the back of my head, a voice, my mother's voice, floated forward. "Your father will always choose the child who mirrors him, not the one who understands him." It was the kind of truth I'd suspected for years, but never wanted confirmed. But tonight, it landed like a final verdict. After the receipt was signed and the tension moved on, Dad stood up first. "Well," he said, stretching, "time to get going." Caden followed. "Thanks again, man. Really." He patted my shoulder on the way out, like I was the family dog who hadn't barked when robbed. They left the diner together. No wave, no backward glance. Just gone. I sat for another minute, maybe two. Then I stood, slid my chair in, and left cash for the waitress on top of the already paid check. Outside, the night was colder than expected. Windy. I walked to my car with my hands in my pockets. I told myself the night was over. But when I got home, the real betrayal was waiting for me in my inbox. I dropped my keys in the bowl near the door, kicked off my shoes, and headed straight for the kitchen. The apartment felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just me. I opened the fridge, stared into it for a second, then closed it again without grabbing anything. I just wanted the night to be done. But when I finally sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, there it was. Subject, trust fund account transfer confirmation sender. No reply, firstmidwesttrust.com. I stared at the subject line for a moment, the letters blurring. Then I clicked. The email opened instantly. Short, cold. Just a few lines confirming the transfer had been processed 8 days ago. Not today, not yesterday. They decided this over a week ago, before the dinner, before I ever sat down at that table with them pretending anything still resembled family. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it pressing deep into my chest. So that was it. The whole performance tonight had been nothing but cleanup, a play to soften the blow that had already been struck. Caden smiling, Dad saying it was for the business. They weren't asking for anything. They were letting me find out after it was already done. There was an attachment, a scanned copy of the transfer authorization form. I clicked it. My breath caught. On the signature line, where mine should have been, was a scribble. Not even close to my handwriting. Not even a decent attempt. It looked like someone had signed it with their left hand while drunk, sloppy, careless. But above it, in bold blue ink, was Harlan Dorn's signature. They forged my consent. They forged my name. And they didn't even try to hide it. I whispered, barely audible to the empty room. They didn't even bother to make it look real. I felt something hollow open up inside me, a space I didn't know was there. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about how little I mattered in their eyes, how replaceable, how expendable. The screen glowed quietly in front of me. I didn't move, just sat there, the only light in the room casting long shadows behind me. I thought about the last few years. The nights I stayed late helping Dad sort through paperwork after his layoff. The weekends I spent fixing things around the house while Caden was off at rooftop bars pitching half-baked business plans to anyone who would listen. I stayed, I showed up, and still, I was the one whose name didn't mean anything. A notification pinged at the top of the screen. New message, Dorn family business meeting. I didn't recognize the thread. It wasn't one I was part of, at least not intentionally. My calendar had auto-synced with an old shared contact group. I clicked out of instinct. Inside, a flood of messages. Dad, Caden. A couple other names I barely knew. Maybe friends, maybe investors. I scrolled up. How much inventory can we afford for launch? Caden needs Silas's name on the lease. It helps with tax status. We'll handle the legal stuff on our end. He doesn't need to be involved. And then Dad's message. Casual, blunt. Silas doesn't need to be here. He'll agree. He always does. The words felt like a slap. He'll agree. He always does. So that was me now. A checkbox, a social security number, a tax benefit. Not a brother, not a son, just a resource. I felt my hands curl into fists, then release again. My breath was shallow, but steady. I whispered, I wasn't a son at that table. I was an asset they assumed they owned. I shut the laptop, sat in the dark for a long while. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat, trying to feel something that wasn't betrayal. It all started making sense, little things from the past few months. The way Dad kept asking about my credit score, just to keep track. The time Caden mentioned wanting a place in Midtown, temporarily. The calls I missed from some number claiming to be from an estate planner. I hadn't seen it then, but I saw it now. They'd been laying the foundation to use me. Slowly. Systematically. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window. From 5 floors up, Detroit looked quiet. Cold lights blinking in distant apartment buildings. Somewhere in this city, people were asleep thinking their families had their backs. I opened the window, let the air bite my skin. And then, just for a moment, I thought of the key in my pocket. The penthouse. The one thing left. The one place they hadn't stolen. Yet. I reached into my coat, pulled the key out, turned it over in my hand. They were living there now. Told me it was just until Caden found something more permanent. They said it was empty, unused. But it was mine, legally. My mother made sure of it. And now, It felt like the only thing keeping me from disappearing completely. They took everything else, I murmured. They're not taking that. I opened my laptop again, not to check the bank account, not to write back. I typed Detroit real estate market trends into the search bar, found the nearest agency that specialized in midtown properties, typed in the address of the penthouse, waited. The number popped up. I stared at it. It was more than I thought. A lot more. That, I said to no one, is my exit. I didn't sleep much, just a couple of restless hours drifting in and out, my mind spinning around numbers, forged documents, and the words they typed behind my back like I wasn't a person. The morning light slipped through the blinds around 8. I was still sitting at the kitchen counter with a half-eaten piece of toast when the buzzer rang. Not many people show up at my place unannounced. I pressed the intercom. Yeah? A calm, confident voice answered. Mr. Dorn, my name is Alexis Rayner. Your mother asked me to deliver an updated valuation for the penthouse. May I come up? My back stiffened. Did you say, my mother? Yes, sir. She reached out several months ago. We've stayed in touch about the Midtown property. I buzzed her in without another word. 30 seconds later, there was a soft knock. I opened the door and saw a woman in her late 30s, impeccably dressed, confident posture, leather folder in hand, real estate badge clipped to her blazer. She extended her hand. Mr. Dorn, good morning. I won't take much of your time. I just need your signature to proceed with the next phase of the listing. Listing? I blinked. Come in. She stepped inside, scanned the room quickly like someone trained to memorize floor plans in one glance, then handed me the folder. Your mother was very particular about timing. We were waiting on some updates from the HOA, but it's all in here. I sat down slowly, flipping the cover open while nodding as if I understood. I didn't. Why didn't my mother ever tell me about this? Alexis continued. There's been significant interest in the unit. Midtown's value jumped again this quarter. We've already got preliminary buyers lined up, but I wanted to confirm with you before listing it officially. I kept my voice even. Sure, I'd like to review everything first. Of course. She smiled and took a seat across from me. I turned the pages, trying not to let my fingers tremble. At first, it all looked standard. Property overview, floor plan, comps from nearby sales. Then I spotted it. A set of maintenance invoices. My stomach turned. They were dated just 2 months ago, signed by Harlan Dorn, not me. The next document was a letter from the Homeowners Association, addressed to the Dorn family estate, not Silas Dorn, the family estate. Beneath that, a typed request signed by Caden submitted to the building board. Approval to repaint, rebrand, and remodel the entry space of Unit 8C. Listed purpose, boutique showroom. I looked up, lips pressed together. They weren't just staying in the penthouse. They were laying the groundwork to turn it into Caden's next venture. Quietly, confidently, like it was already theirs. I turned to the final page. The valuation. My hand slipped. The folder almost fell from my grip. The number was 3 times what I thought it would be, and 12 times higher than what Dad claimed when he last updated me years ago. 12. He said the place was barely worth anything after the market dip. They lied. All of them. I set the folder down and took a long breath through my nose. Alexis leaned forward. Would you like me to walk you through any section? I shook my head. Just a few quick questions. Of course. Is the property entirely in my name? She nodded. Yes, 100%. It was deeded to you by your mother and updated in the county records just before her passing. Can I sell it without notifying the current occupants? You can. However, legally, you'll need to provide them notice once the sale closes. But the listing process doesn't require their approval. I paused. And how fast could we close? With the demand we're seeing in Midtown, I'd say 2 to 3 weeks max. Quicker if the buyer pays in cash. I nodded slowly. All right, she smiled. Would you like me to send the listing contract to your email? I hesitated. Not out of uncertainty, but because this was the first moment in weeks I felt in control of anything. They took my trust fund. They used my name behind my back. They spoke about me like I was a utility, not a person. But this was still mine. Yes, I said. Send it over. She stood, gathered her folder, and adjusted the badge on her jacket. Excellent. I'll send it within the hour. I walked her to the door. Her heels clicked softly against the tile as she disappeared down the hallway. The sound echoed like a ticking clock. I closed the door and leaned against it, staring at nothing for a few seconds. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Caden. Hey bro, can you call Dad when you get a sec? He wants to talk paperwork. I put the phone down without replying, sat back at the table, opened the folder again, and looked at the signature on Caden's remodel request. He wrote, for branding purposes. Branding. They were never going to ask me. They were going to let me keep paying utilities, taxes, cleaning fees, then flip the keys into Caden's hand like I was just part of the foundation. But not this time. This time, I had the deed, the law, the leverage, and my mother's name on the documents to back me. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing. I didn't know it yet, but signing that contract would expose an even deeper betrayal hiding in plain sight. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the fridge and the occasional creak from the old heating unit kicking in. I was still sitting by the window, fingers lightly tapping the edge of the listing agreement when a loud knock pulled me out of the moment. I figured it was the delivery I'd forgotten I ordered last night. Some groceries and a half-hearted attempt at preparing for a normal day. Instead, when I opened the door, Caden pushed right past me like he owned the place. He reeked of aftershave and cheap urgency. Dress shirt half tucked, sweat at his temples, eyes darting like he'd rehearsed a speech but forgot the lines. I didn't say a word at first, just closed the door behind him, slowly. You've been ignoring your phone, he snapped, turning around. You barged into my home, I replied calmly. He waved that off. Why didn't you sign the inventory purchase forms? Dad said we needed your authorization yesterday. I blinked at him, stunned by the audacity. Then I said, plain and level, why would I sign anything after you used my trust fund without even telling me? He scoffed. You weren't doing anything with it. I'm building something that benefits all of us. This isn't personal, Silas. I stepped back, arms crossed. He kept going. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I'm carrying this family. You have the luxury of sitting around, overthinking everything. I'm the one who has to act. It was so familiar, that tone, that practiced narrative, the guilt trip dressed up as leadership. You're overreacting, he added, voice softening. Dad said you were on board. You always help. Don't start ruining things now. Not when we're so close. There it was, the rewritten script, the gaslight, the same lines they used my whole life to justify the imbalance. You should be grateful to be a part of this, he said, his voice rising again. You want to tear it all down because of a few miscommunications. Miscommunications. You forged my signature, I said. He blinked. We had to move fast. I stared at him, and for a moment I didn't recognize my own brother. His face, familiar since childhood, looked plastic, polished, hollow behind the eyes. "We need to talk," he said, rubbing his temples. "Come with me. Let's go back to Ma's diner. It's neutral ground. We can settle this without drama." He was already halfway to the door before I agreed, mostly because I didn't want a scene in my hallway. Neighbors didn't need to hear what I was about to say. We drove in silence, back in the booth we once shared as kids, back when birthdays meant root beer floats and Dad actually laughed. Caden started his act again. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be," he began, loud enough for the waitress to glance over. "I've done everything to carry this family, and you're too wrapped up in your own pride to see it." He leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Maybe this isn't about money," he said. "Maybe you're just jealous. You never had the guts to build anything, and now that I am, you're threatened." I didn't touch my coffee. "You know what?" he continued. "You've always been like this. Bitter. Watching from the sidelines. Always acting like you're better, but never doing anything." Then, as if trying to win some invisible audience, he leaned back and said louder than necessary, "He's dragging his feet on the launch. Can you believe that? He's delaying everything because he wants credit." A couple from another table turned their heads. Caden dropped his voice to a harsh whisper. "Stop acting like a burden." That word cracked something in me. Burden. It echoed through every year I paid the rent without being asked, co-signed the loan when Dad couldn't, kept the fridge full after layoffs, stayed in Michigan when I wanted to leave, just in case they needed me. I stood up. "You don't get to talk to me like this anymore," I said, my voice steady but low. He blinked, surprised. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a 20, and dropped it on the table. For the coffee, I didn't drink. Then I turned and walked out. Behind me, Caden called my name, twice. I didn't look back. Outside, the air hit hard. Dry, cold, Midwest morning cold. The kind that slices through your coat and gets into your bones. I stood there for a minute, hands trembling. Not from the cold. Not entirely. My head buzzed. I couldn't tell if I was angry or just done. I made it back to the apartment somehow. The elevator ride felt like hours. When I stepped inside, I didn't turn the lights on. I just dropped my keys and sat on the floor by the couch, jacket still on. They'd taken everything. The money Mom left for me, the credit I built, the penthouse I grew up in. And now they were flipping the script, saying I owed them something. I stared at the wall. "I don't recognize my own family anymore," I whispered, and I meant it. I used to think dysfunction was just another name for closeness, that the yelling, the guilt, the "we do what we have to do" attitude, that was normal. But this wasn't normal. This was theft, disrespect, rewriting reality and expecting me to nod along. I didn't know how long I sat there. Could have been 10 minutes. Could have been 2 hours. The quiet wrapped around me like a wet blanket. Then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look, but I did. Alexis Rayner. "Buyers are very interested. We can move forward sooner than expected. Let me know." I stared at the screen for a long time, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't shame, or fear, or grief. It was purpose. Maybe I couldn't fix what they took, but maybe I could still take something back. I wiped my eyes, stood up, and whispered, "Let's see how fast they notice what's slipping through their fingers." And just when I thought I couldn't take one more hit, My father delivered the one blow I never saw coming. It happened early afternoon, just after I'd made myself a cup of coffee I didn't really want. The sky outside was gray. One of those Michigan days that sat heavy on your shoulders before it ever rained. There was a knock on my door. Sharp, not rushed, but deliberate. I knew it wasn't the mailman. I opened the door. Harlan stood there, back straight, chin slightly lifted, as if posture could cover the rot in his intentions. He clutched a thick manila envelope in one hand, tight like it was a weapon, his coat still buttoned, face unreadable. Without a word, he walked right past me into the apartment. He didn't ask, he didn't greet, he didn't sit. He stood in the middle of my living room like he owned the air and said flatly, "We need to talk. Now." I didn't answer, just nodded once and leaned against the wall across from him, arms crossed. He started in like a well-worn cassette tape, familiar scratches and all. "You're too emotional," he said. "You always take things the wrong way. This is business. You're making trouble for your brother when you should be helping." I kept my face neutral. I'd heard this script my whole life. Then he said something I hadn't heard before, at least not so plainly. "You have one job in this family, Silas. Support the future. That means supporting Caden. He has a plan. You just react." A heat rose in my chest. Not rage yet, but the precursor to it. The quiet fire. Harlan opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. Thick, printed pages. Tabs. Legal jargon. He spread them across my dining table like cards in a losing hand. "There," he said. "Transfer of occupancy. Power of attorney draft. Voluntary relinquishment of your claim to the penthouse. Everything's here. All you need to do is sign." I stepped forward slowly. My eyes scanned the documents. None of them had seals. None of them had signatures from an attorney. They were dressed up to look real, but they were theater, paper masks. "You want me to hand it all over," I said, more to myself than him. He nodded like it was obvious. "We'll handle the penthouse from here. You don't need to complicate things. This is what's best for the family." He said it like it was a favor. I looked down at the letter again, saw how voluntary was typed in bold, as if shouting it made it true. I looked up. "You forged my name once already." "That was different," he said. This is bigger than you. If the penthouse sells, the proceeds should go to the family, not just one person. You've never needed money the way Caden does." I blinked. "You already stole $34,000 from me." He laughed. Actually laughed. "That was an investment. Don't be dramatic." That's when something snapped. Not loudly. Quietly. Like the final thread on an overworn sweater giving way. "You always twist it," I said, voice low. "No matter what happens, I'm the problem. You never take accountability. You never ask. You just take and justify it later." Harlan's expression shifted, colder now. "If you refuse to sign," he said, stepping in closer, "you'll force my hand. I'll tell people you're sabotaging your brother's career. I'll say you've been stealing. I've got years of records that show you benefited from this family more than you ever gave back." He paused. "People believe parents, Silas, not the kid who hides behind an apartment and a 9 to 5. He knew exactly where to stab. That was the fear I'd carried since I was a teenager, that no matter what I said, he'd always have the louder voice, the older voice, the wiser one. He set a pen down on the table. "You have until tomorrow. Sign these, or we move forward without you. And trust me, you'll lose more than just that penthouse. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a line drawn in permanent ink. I stared at the pen, at the man who raised me, at the man who'd always told me who I was, what I owed, and why I should never question it. And then I felt something stir in me that wasn't fear this time. It was clarity. I picked up the documents slowly, flipped through them page by page, not to read, just to see his face flicker with the hope that I might obey. Then I looked him in the eye and said, "These aren't legally binding." His jaw tightened. "And even if they were," I continued, "I'm done agreeing to things you decide for me." He didn't move, so I set the papers back in his hands. "Leave." He stared at me for a long moment. No yelling, no threats, just silence, heavy as concrete. And then he turned, walked out the door. The look he gave me as he left wasn't disappointment. It was warning. And by that night, the retaliation began. It started with a phone call just after dinner. I had just finished rinsing the plate I barely touched when my phone lit up on the counter with a number I didn't recognize. Michigan area code. No name. I let it ring twice, debated letting it go to voicemail, then picked up. "This is Silas," I said, keeping my voice even. A man's voice, low and clipped, came through the line. "Mr. Dorn, this is Gerald Langley. I'm calling in regard to a financial report that's been flagged under your name." I paused. "What kind of report?" "A complaint was submitted earlier today, alleging misuse of family funds and suspicious activity tied to a high-value property transaction. Your name came up. We're trying to get clarity before this escalates." I stood there, hand gripping the phone tighter. "Escalates to what?" He paused. "If not resolved, it could prompt a formal legal inquiry. Property fraud, misrepresentation of trust funds, that sort of thing." I closed my eyes. My chest went still. The penthouse wasn't even sold yet. The paperwork had barely started. But I knew this wasn't a coincidence. This had Harland written all over it. I swallowed hard. "Who filed the complaint?" "Anonymous, officially," he replied. "But we were also contacted by a concerned family member, your father, who indicated you may be emotionally overwhelmed at the moment. He wanted to ensure the family's assets were protected." That one sentence felt like a blow to the ribs, emotionally unstable. That's what he was calling me now. That's the narrative he was planting. Not just behind closed doors, but out in the world. I forced my voice to stay calm. "You're not with the state, are you?" The line went quiet. Then he added, "This is more of a courtesy call. From someone who's known your family a long time. You understand how quickly things can get messy." And there it was. This wasn't an official inquiry. It was a performance, staged just well enough to shake me. A family friend playing concerned third party to scare me off the penthouse. He wasn't done. "Just know," he said slowly, "if this continues, certain business partners around Detroit might hesitate to engage with someone involved in this kind of mess. That kind of rumor sticks. I'd hate to see that happen to you." The heat climbed up my neck. I felt my pulse tick up in my throat. "You know what's funny?" I said. "My father never mentioned the forged signature on the trust fund withdrawal, did he?" There was silence on the other end. Then the line clicked off. No goodbye. No answer. Just gone. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in hand, staring at the faucet like it might explain something. They weren't just retaliating. They were preemptively discrediting me. I leaned back against the fridge and exhaled hard through my nose. Minutes passed. Then another ping. My old coworker, Tina, from the firm I left years ago, texted me screenshots. A Facebook post from someone in Harlan's golf group read, "Sad what greed does. Betraying your own blood over a piece of property. Tragic." Underneath, someone else commented, "Imagine selling the home your parents still live in. Some people don't know what family means." I didn't even know these people, but they were already primed with a story. A story that painted me as a cold, selfish son turning his back on the very people who raised him. I muttered to myself, "They're poisoning the well before I even get to the river." I paced the apartment, my steps tight, my breaths shallow. I could feel the anger rising, but also a deeper sting. The loneliness of being turned into a villain by your own blood. But something inside me didn't collapse this time, not the way it used to. Instead, it started organizing. They lied about the money. They faked my signature. They tried to frame me as unstable. And now they were coming for my name, the only thing I had left that they hadn't already used. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, clicked into a blank document and typed, "Timeline. Dorn Family Trust Fund and Penthouse." Then line by line, I started to build it. October 14th, Harlan withdraws $30,200 from trust account, bank receipt, no approval. October 17th, email from Harlan, a shared family asset, manipulative language. October 23rd, Silas receives fake power of attorney draft, photo attached. November 3rd, Realtor Alexis arrives with valuation, confirms legal sole ownership. November 4th, Harlan attempts pressure visit, brings envelope with forged docs. November 5th, threatening call from Gerald Langley, family friend posing as third party. November 5th, evening, Facebook smear campaign begins, screenshots attached. Then I opened my email and started gathering proof. Screenshots, email headers, scanned documents, HOA letters, copies of maintenance bills signed only by Harlan. By the time I finished, I had nearly 30 files in a clean folder labeled "Defense if they push." They thought they could bury me in shame, but shame only works if you think you're wrong. I stared at the folder. I wasn't wrong. And if they wanted a fight, they were finally going to meet a version of me they hadn't prepared for. The sale of the penthouse wasn't just a way out anymore. It was my shield. And the very next day, the universe handed me the moment I needed. The one chance to turn everything back on them. It happened in front of everyone, at a place they never imagined I'd show up. Detroit's Midtown Business Association held their quarterly luncheon at the Magnolia Event Hall, a place I hadn't stepped foot in since college fundraisers with my mother. The room was all polished wood, soft jazz, and the low hum of people who hadn't checked their bank accounts in years. I slipped in just before the keynote began. No fanfare, just a deep breath and steady steps through the double doors. I spotted Harlan first, standing near the stage, shaking hands like a man who'd never been caught doing anything wrong. Coulson was beside him, grinning in a tailored blue blazer, throwing back that same rehearsed laugh he used since we were kids. They looked like the perfect father-son duo. Until I showed up. My palms were cold, but my chest was steady. I walked past the hors d'oeuvres, past the board members who gave polite nods. No one had time to notice me. Not yet. Harlan stepped behind the podium. He cleared his throat and spoke like he was reading from a sacred script. This city was built on values, integrity, legacy, family. I let out a short laugh. Quiet, but just loud enough. A few heads turned. Coulson blinked. Harlan's voice faltered for a second, then regained its rhythm. That was my cue. I stepped forward, slow and deliberate. My hands stayed in my coat pockets. Every step echoed louder than it should have. "Funny thing about integrity, Dad," I said, voice calm. "I don't remember signing over my trust fund to your legacy project." A ripple moved through the room. Conversation stopped. Forks hung in the air. Harland froze. Coulson's smile dropped like someone yanked the strings out of him. Harlan leaned toward the mic again, forcing a stiff smile. "Silas, this isn't the—" "It's exactly the place," I cut in. "You've spent months crafting a reputation. Might as well see how it holds up in daylight." He stepped away from the podium, jaw tight, his face a careful mix of irritation and false calm. "Come outside. We'll talk this through." "We're not talking outside," I said. "We're talking here, right here, with everyone watching." The crowd shifted, some curious, others clearly uncomfortable, but I wasn't there for them. Harlan lowered his voice as he approached. "If you keep this up, you'll regret it." I stared him in the eyes. "You already made sure of that." Someone, maybe a board member, I wasn't sure, stood within earshot, eyes narrowing. They'd heard it. That mattered. I turned back toward the room, projecting my voice. "I spoke to the bank," I said. "The signature on the withdrawal from my trust wasn't mine. It was forged." A few people gasped. I caught a woman from the finance committee muttering something under her breath. I pressed on. "Under Michigan law, forgery for financial gain is a felony. It's not just unethical, it's criminal." Harlan's complexion drained. He looked like a man realizing the ground he'd built his empire on was turning to sand. Then Coulson snapped. "He let me use it," he blurted. "He said you didn't deserve the money." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to him. Even Harlan looked like he hadn't expected that outburst. Coulson seemed to realize it too late, his mouth half open, searching for a rewind button that didn't exist. I didn't say anything right away. I just watched them unravel. My father's hand clenching at his side, Coulson's eyes darting around the room like he could pull the words back in. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like mourning. Harlan stepped between us, trying to take control again. "There's been a misunderstanding. We don't air family disagreements like this." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a manila folder. "No misunderstanding," I said. "Inside are the emails from the realtor, the letters from the condo association, and copies of the trust fund transaction, with your name, Dad, and your signature." I placed the folder on the podium. "You wanted war? Here's the truth. On paper." He didn't touch it. The room had shifted now. Where there had been smiles and wine glasses, there were stares and folded arms, people whispering, people stepping back from Harlan. Then, I added, calm and clear, "And while we're all here talking about family legacy, I sold the Penthouse." Gasps burst through the room. Coulson turned red. "You... what?" "It closes next week," I said, not flinching. "You'll need to make new arrangements." Harlan took a step back like I'd hit him. But I hadn't raised a hand. I didn't have to. "You can't just..." he started. I held up a hand. "Everything was in my name. You forged financial documents. Coulson spent money that didn't belong to him. And you tried to ruin my reputation to keep me quiet." People were no longer just whispering. A few committee members exchanged glances and moved away from Harlan. Others just stared at the folder like it might explode. I looked around the room one last time. "I didn't come here for revenge," I said. "I came here to stop lying for this family." Then I turned, walked back down the aisle, and didn't look back. Outside, the cold air wrapped around me like a friend. My chest felt tight, but lighter somehow. My feet moved on instinct, out into the gray December light. For the first time in a long time, I had said the thing that needed to be said, and I'd said it out loud. But when I got home, something unexpected was waiting for me on my doorstep. Something that changed how the story would end. I didn't see it right away. I was still replaying everything from the luncheon, the voices echoing in my head, the looks on people's faces, the way my father's hand shook when he realized the room had turned on him. I walked down the hallway of my apartment building like someone moving underwater, keys in my hand, breath tight in my chest. Then I noticed it, resting against my front door. A plain white envelope. No stamps, no tracking labels, just my name, written in a handwriting I hadn't seen in more than a decade. I froze. My mother's handwriting. I crouched down slowly, the hallway suddenly too quiet, and picked it up with both hands like it might slip through my fingers if I wasn't careful. My heart thudded once, heavy, before I even stepped inside. I closed the door behind me, set my coat on the chair, and carried the envelope to the kitchen table. I sat there a moment, staring at the familiar loops in the lettering. My mother used to write grocery lists in that same style. Soft curves, patient strokes. I finally opened it. The paper inside crackled from old age. The letter was dated 12 years ago, postmarked from Ohio. Addressed to me. I whispered, "This shouldn't exist, because back then I should have received it. And I never did. Someone kept it from me." My throat tightened as I unfolded it. Her voice came alive in the words, almost like she was sitting across from me again. "Silas, sweetheart, I know your father wants everything to go to Colson, but the trust fund is for you, only you, for your future, not anyone else's. Use it to build the life you deserve." I placed a hand over my mouth. The room blurred. It wasn't anger that rose inside me. It was something deeper, a kind of grief that had been waiting years to surface. She had seen all of it coming, the favoritism, the pressure, the way I was expected to shrink while my brother grew in any direction he pleased. At the bottom of the letter, a final line. "I told your father to give this to you when you turned 18. If you're reading it late, he chose not to." I leaned back slowly, the weight settling into my chest like a truth I'd always felt but never had proof of. Everything made sense now. Not just the trust fund, not just the penthouse, the whole story of my place in that house. I wasn't forgotten. I was hidden. When I reached into the envelope again, something else slid out, a small square photograph. My mother holding me as a baby. She looked young and tired but joyful, her smile soft at the edges. On the back of the photo were 5 words, "You were never second place." That was when the tears finally came. Not loud, not frantic. Just steady, years of silence breaking open at once. I held the photo against my forehead, breathing through the ache in my chest. A knock sounded at the door. I wiped my face quickly, stood, and opened it just enough to see who was there. Harland. He wasn't wearing his usual stern expression. His shoulders drooped, his eyes red, his confidence stripped away. For the first time in my life, he looked smaller than me. "Silas," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I didn't step aside. I didn't invite him in. I stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. He swallowed hard. "Colson's business. It's falling apart. The investors pulled out after what happened today. He's been calling me nonstop saying he's ruined. He's falling apart." I nodded once, not out of satisfaction, just acknowledgement. Harlan searched my face, maybe expecting anger or triumph, but I felt neither, just a calm sadness. He let out a slow breath. I made mistakes, but you blindsided us today. I don't know how to fix any of this. You don't fix it, I said quietly. You sit with it, the same way I sat with everything you put on my shoulders for years. He looked down at the carpet, his lips trembling. When he spoke again, it was almost a whisper. Your mother wanted you to have everything. I couldn't accept it. He didn't explain further. He didn't apologize. He just let the truth slip out, the closest he would ever come to admitting what he'd done. A confession, not redemption. I let the silence settle between us before I spoke. I don't hate you, I said, but I won't live for your approval anymore. And I'm done being the quiet son who cleans up your damage. He lifted his eyes, searching for something, maybe a piece of the boy he used to mold. But that boy was gone. I stepped back inside and closed the door gently, leaving him standing in the hallway. Later that week, I signed the final sale documents for the Penthouse. No celebration, no dramatic moment, just my signature on the dotted line, turning the last piece of their control into something that protected me instead of them. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter, like I'd set down a box I'd been carrying since childhood. When I got home that evening, I placed my mother's photo on my desk. I set it upright so I could see her smile, the one that said she knew who I was long before I did. On the back, those 5 words waited for me again. You were never second place. For the first time, I let myself believe them. This wasn't a victory. It was a beginning. The first one that finally belonged to me.